The native woman was terrified and shameful, but the rancher's daughter asked, "Is she my new mama?" The desert shimmered like hammered brass beneath the noon sun. Dust rose from the road in trembling waves, curling around the feet of a young Apache woman walking alone. Her name was Yanni, though no one had spoken it kindly for a long time. Sweat streaked the dirt on her face. The air burned her lungs until every breath tasted of metal. Behind her lay the Holloway Ranch, a place that had called her servant, then witch, then worse. They said she'd bewitched a white man. They never said he'd been drunk. The coins they threw still clinked in the small cloth bag at her side, each one cutting deeper than a lash. Ahead, the land was empty, but for a station sign half buried in dust, Dry Creek Junction. She didn't know where the next train would take her, only that it would carry her farther from shame and closer to silence. By the summer of 1881, the Arizona Territory lay scorched beneath a pitiless sky. The drought had lasted so long that even the coyotes stopped howling at night. Their voices cracked into silence. Yucca blades stood brittle as bone, and every hoofstep on the dry ground echoed like a hammer striking stone. The air itself carried a strange, metallic scent, as if the desert were smoldering from within. At the edge of this forsaken valley, a small railway station leaned beneath its own dust. Dry Creek Junction, no creek left, only thirst. Freight wagons creaked nearby, and the few travelers who waited for the afternoon train kept to the shade, glancing often at the sky as though rain might remember them. Yanni sat apart from them all, on a bench sun-bleached to the color of bone. Her dress, once pale blue, had turned the gray of ash. A small bundle lay by her feet, a folded blanket, a comb carved from mesquite, and a string of worn beads she had not dared to sell. Her hair, long and dark as a raven's wing, was braided loosely over one shoulder. Her skin glowed warm against the dust, but her eyes dark, still, and wary told of someone who had learned not to expect kindness. She did not flinch when she heard the hiss of the arriving train. Steam burst into the air like a sudden storm. Doors opened, passengers stepped down, and the quiet station came to life for a moment. Among them was a tall man carrying a child on his hip. He moved with the weary steadiness of someone used to hard work and long silences. Alden Rourke wore the sun on his skin and the desert in his eyes, a gray that caught the light like weathered steel. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing scars faded to pale lines. A man who had seen more battles than he cared to name, and survived only by learning when to speak and when to keep still. The little girl in his arms, June, no more than 5, squirmed until he set her down. She smoothed her faded yellow dress and looked around with the innocent curiosity that only children carried. Her gaze landed on Yanni. "Is she my new mama?" The words fell into the stillness like a stone into water. The chatter stopped. Someone coughed. Yanni's heart stuttered, not from shame this time, but shock. Alden knelt beside his daughter, resting a hand on her small shoulder. His voice was low, even. "Don't speak out of turn, Junebug." Then he turned to Yanni. For a moment, he simply studied her, the way she sat straight despite exhaustion, the defiant set of her jaw, the quiet tremor in her hands. There was something in her that reminded him of the land itself, proud, scarred, still standing. "I'm looking for help at my ranch," he said finally. "It's 10 miles west. Work's honest. I don't ask questions you don't want to answer." Yanni hesitated, her throat tight. She saw no mockery in his face, no pity either, only a plain truth. She nodded once. Alden tipped his hat in silent agreement, then lifted June back into his arms and walked toward the wagon waiting beyond the fence. Yanni gathered her bundle and followed, behind them. The station faded into the shimmer of heat. Ahead, the long red road stretched toward the Chiricahua Mountains, where a place called Coyote Bend Ranch waited beneath the weight of sun and silence, and where, for the first time in months, someone had spoken to her without the word Apache wrapped in contempt. The road to Coyote Bend Ranch wound through miles of cracked earth and mesquite thorns. By the time the wagon reached the valley, the sun had turned the world to brass. Ahead, the ranch appeared like a mirage low fences, a windmill creaking above an empty water trough, and a house built of weathered pine leaning into the wind. A banner of smoke curled from its chimney, fragile against the white-blue sky. When Yanni stepped down from the wagon, the heat pressed against her skin like a hand. She stood still, unsure whether to move until a soft, gravelly voice broke the silence. "New face," said an old man leaning on the corral rail. His skin was the color of sun-worn cedar, and his hair hung in 2 silver braids. Kai Nantan, the others called him. Apache, like her, though older by decades. His eyes met hers briefly, and in them she saw the rarest thing: no suspicion, only quiet recognition. From the cookhouse door emerged May Booker, full-bodied and brisk, apron flapping in the wind. "Mr. Rourke, that the help you finally found? Well, she's half the size of Eli, so I expect she'll work twice as smart." A deep laugh came from behind her. Eli Booker, May's husband, a mountain of a man whose skin gleamed like polished walnut. He carried a bucket in each hand as if they weighed nothing. "Welcome, miss," he said warmly. "Don't mind my wife. She scares rattlesnakes for breakfast." May swatted at him, chuckling, and turned to Yanni. "Come along, child. Let's get you some water before you melt." As Yanni followed, she caught sight of another figure lounging near the barn, a young man in a wide hat, plucking lazy notes from a battered guitar. Tomas Rivera, she later learned. A Mexican drifter who sang more than he spoke. He raised his hand in greeting, the melody twining with the hum of the windmill. Inside, the house smelled of flour, wood smoke, and coffee gone cold. The scent alone felt like a kind of peace. May poured her a tin cup of water. "You can call me May. We keep our own rhythm here. You'll find it soon enough." Yanni nodded, murmuring thanks. Her voice came out hoarse from days of silence. That night, she lay on a narrow cot in the small room off the kitchen. Through the window, she saw the vast sky spread like black velvet, stars sharp as needles. She thought of the townspeople's laughter, of the cruel words that had followed her all the way to Dry Creek, and how Alden Rourke hadn't asked a single one. The next morning began before sunrise. Roosters crowed. Hooves stamped the dry ground. Yanni joined May at the stove, her movements quick and precise. No one told her what to do. She simply knew how to work, and work became her refuge. She scrubbed, carried, mended, and stayed out of sight. Alden kept his distance at first. He was a man who spoke less than the wind but noticed everything. When he passed the kitchen window, she saw the way he slowed just slightly, as if listening to her hum while she worked. Days turned into weeks. June, ever fearless, followed Yanni everywhere, trailing her shadow through the yard. One evening, when the chores were done, the girl asked shyly, "Do you know any songs?" Yanni hesitated. Then, with a voice low and uncertain at first, she began to sing an Apache, an old lullaby her mother once hummed when the rain came. The melody carried beyond the porch, over the corrals and into the falling dusk. Conversation in the bunkhouse faded. Even the horses turned their heads. When the song ended, only the sound of the wind remained. June giggled softly, pressing her small hands together as if she'd caught something precious. From the shadows near the barn, Alden watched. For the first time in a long while, the weight of drought and loss lifted from his chest. The ranch that had long felt hollow seemed, somehow, to breathe again. Summer dragged on like an endless breath. Each morning began in silence, the kind of silence that only the desert could hold, where even birds dared not waste their songs. The drought had stripped the land bare, yet somehow, life at Coyote Bend Ranch began to find rhythm again. Yanni rose before dawn to fetch water from the well, her hands blistered but steady. She learned the creak of every hinge, the smell of every corner flour dust in the pantry, horse sweat near the stables, cedar smoke from the hearth. She spoke little, though May's chatter often wrapped around her like a warm shawl. "You work too quiet, girl," May teased one morning, slapping dough onto the counter. "Ain't no shame in letting folks hear you breathe." Yanni smiled faintly but said nothing. The words she carried inside were too fragile for air. It was June who first cracked the walls around her. The child's laughter filled spaces that even sunlight couldn't reach. She followed Yanni everywhere, asking questions about the wind, the clouds, the feathers braided in Yanni's hair. "Are they from a magic bird?" June asked once. "Not magic," Yanni replied softly. "Just brave enough to fly through a storm. Then they're magic to me," the girl said, grinning wide enough to show the gap in her front teeth. From the porch, Alden watched the two of them, the woman who had forgotten how to laugh, and the child who reminded her how. He never interrupted, only listened. Sometimes pausing mid-saddle repair or leaning against a post. Arms folded. Something about Yanni's presence softened the edges of his silence. Weeks passed. Trust grew not through words, but through small acts. May began to hand Yanni the ladle without hesitation. Eli nodded when she joined him to haul hay. Even Tomas, who joked about everything, stopped his teasing when he saw how carefully she mended his torn shirt. But with trust came fear. Yanni often caught herself glancing toward the distant hills, half expecting riders to appear, men who might still whisper her name with venom. She never spoke of it. She only worked harder, as though effort could erase the past. Then one afternoon, Alden asked her to ride along to Dry Creek for supplies. The sky shimmered white, and the road burned beneath the hooves. June rode with May in the back, humming one of Yanni's songs. The town quieted as they entered. Heads turned. Yanni felt the air shift, the same wary weight she had known all her life. Inside the general store, the smell of kerosene and dried beans stung her nose. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Talbot, looked her up and down before folding her arms. "I don't sell to Apache," she said flatly. "Brings bad luck." For a heartbeat. Yanni froze. Shame prickled her skin, though she'd done nothing wrong. She reached for her bag, ready to leave, but Alden spoke before she could move. "Then maybe you should sell the whole place," he said calmly, setting several silver dollars on the counter. "That enough to buy your luck back." The room went still. A man near the door coughed and turned away. Mrs. Talbot's lips thinned, but she took the money, muttering under her breath. Alden gathered the supplies without another word, his jaw tight. Outside, Yanni tried to thank him, but he shook his head. "Don't," he said quietly. "Shouldn't have been needed." They drove home in silence. Yet that night, while May stirred stew by the fire, Yanni caught Alden's eyes across the table, steady, unguarded. Something passed between them that needed no language. As the days stretched into late August, drought turned the hills into glass. Every living thing waited for rain that would not come. Yanni often sat on the porch after sunset, June asleep in her lap, the air humming with heat. Alden sometimes joined her, a respectful distance away. "She likes you," he said one night, nodding toward his daughter. "She's brave," Yanni replied. "Like her father." Alden gave a quiet laugh, one that sounded unused. Brave, maybe foolish. Yanni turned toward him, the lamplight catching the faint scar that cut across his cheek. "Foolish men don't stand between a storm and their people," she said. He didn't answer, but his eyes softened in the dark. That week, May caught Yanni humming again in the kitchen and smiled knowingly. "Careful now, child. The heart's a wild horse once you open the gate. You best be ready to hold on." Yanni only laughed, a rare, genuine sound that made May grin wider. By the end of summer, the ranch had changed. It wasn't just the fences Alden repaired or the garden May coaxed back to life. It was the way they all moved slower, easier, as if something fragile but good had begun to grow among them. And yet, beneath that calm, Yanni felt the old unease stir like wind through dry grass. Because in places like Dry Creek, peace was never left alone for long. Rumors traveled faster than rain. The first whisper came from a wagon that rattled through Dry Creek on a Tuesday morning. By sundown, the story had already reached Coyote Bend. "They say the Apache girl from the Holloway Ranch is working out there," a trader told the blacksmith. "Got herself thrown out for witchcraft, put a spell on her master," they said. By the next market day, it wasn't a rumor anymore. It was truth repeated often enough to be believed. The desert didn't need rain to make things spread, only wind. And human mouths. May heard it first at the feed store. The woman beside her lowered her voice. "You best be careful, May. They say she charms men with her eyes." May slammed a sack of flour onto the counter, the sound sharp as thunder. "Then maybe that's why the good Lord gave her two. You got the same number, better watch yourself." But Yanni heard, and though no one at the ranch treated her differently, the knowledge sank into her like sand after rain, slow, heavy, inescapable. She began rising earlier, working later, slipping from conversation like smoke. Alden noticed. He always did. One evening, he found her mending June's dress by lamplight, the thread trembling between her fingers. "You haven't eaten," he said quietly. "I'm not hungry. You used to hum when you sewed. I've forgotten the song." He hesitated, searching for words that didn't exist, then only said, "You don't have to carry what isn't yours." Yanni looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "It's always mine, even when it isn't." Outside, the horizon glowed with another kind of heat, not sunlight, but the gathering anger of men who needed something to blame. 2 days later, they came, a band of riders from town, 5 or 6 of them, dust trailing behind like smoke. They halted at the ranch gate, spitting and grinning. One called out, "Rourke, you keeping a pet snake in your house these days?" Alden stepped onto the porch, hat tilted low, shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. Behind him, Kai Nantan and Eli stood silent, a wall of calm readiness. The leader, a broad man with a sunburnt face, spat in the dirt. "Word is you're harboring that Apache witch from Silverton. Thought we'd warn you before something bad happens." Alden's voice was flat, steady. "Bad's already here. I see it standing in front of me." Laughter rippled through the group, but no one moved forward. His stillness was heavier than their noise. "In this valley," Alden went on, "there's only 2 things worth keeping: sun and fairness. If you didn't bring either, you can ride back with the dust that carried you here." The words fell like stones. The men shifted in their saddles, muttering, "Finally." The leader turned his horse. "Suit yourself, Rourke. But when she curses your house, don't come crying to town." They rode off, leaving a cloud that hung in the air long after they were gone. When the dust settled, Yanni stood at the doorway, eyes wide, breath caught in her chest. Alden didn't look back at her, just walked past, his hands shaking only after the door had closed. That night, she sat on the porch, the smell of sage and smoke thick around her. Tears slipped soundlessly down her cheeks, not from fear, but from something sharper. For the first time, someone had stood in front of her instead of behind her back. Then came the fire. The sky that evening was the color of tarnished copper. Heat lightning flickered beyond the ridges, silent and distant until it wasn't. A single strike, a dry crack splitting the horizon, and the world lit up. The bolt struck near the stables, turning brittle grass into flame faster than breath. May screamed first. Eli ran for the pump. Alden sprinted toward the barn, where the horses screamed against their stalls. The air filled with sparks, wind, and terror. And somewhere in that chaos came a smaller scream, June's. "She's inside," May cried. Alden froze, dread turning his limbs to stone. The smoke rolled thick, the flames roaring. Before he could move, a blur darted past him, Yanni, wrapping a wet blanket around her shoulders and plunging into the burning dark. Yanni. The fire swallowed her whole. Inside, the heat clawed her lungs raw. She followed the child's coughing, stumbling over fallen boards until she found June huddled beside a trough. "Hold on," she rasped, covering the girl with the blanket, shielding her with her own body. Together they crawled, choking, the air glowing white-hot. Outside, Alden fought through smoke, tearing at the door with his bare hands. When it burst open, Yanni stumbled out, carrying June against her chest. Her hair was singed, skin blistered, but her eyes, those eyes were alive. Alden caught them both, falling to his knees in the dirt as Eli and May rushed forward. For a long moment, the only sound was fire and breath. Then Alden spoke, voice raw. "They said you bewitched men." Yanni blinked through tears and ash. "And do you believe them?" He shook his head slowly, pressing his forehead against hers. "I do now," he whispered, "because my heart's not mine anymore." The words hung between them as rainless thunder rolled through the mountains. By dawn, the barn was a black skeleton against a pale sky. The fire had spared the house, but the smell of smoke lingered sharp, stubborn, unyielding. Yanni's hands were wrapped in linen. Her palms blistered. June slept beside her on the couch, hair matted with soot. Alden sat nearby, his face drawn but gentle, watching both of them as if afraid they might vanish. Outside, the first faint breeze since spring swept through the valley. It carried with it the smell of wet earth, a promise. Morning came soft and gray, the sky smudged with ash and dawn. Coyote Bend lay half in ruin, half in peace. Smoke still curled from the black ribs of the barn, and the ground shimmered with the strange stillness that follows disaster, that fragile hush between loss and gratitude. When the first wagon from Dry Creek rolled into the yard, Yanni thought her eyes deceived her. Townsfolk, men who'd spat her name a week ago, now stepped down. Eyes lowered, hats in hand. No one spoke of curses. They came with buckets, hammers, and boards. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps the desert had finally taught them humility. May met them with her apron still dusted in flour. "Well," she said, "if you've come to stare, you might as well lift something while you're at it." The men obeyed without a word. Alden didn't join the rebuilding. He stayed near the porch where Yanni sat, her hands swathed in white linen. June slept curled against her side, her small face pressed to Yanni's shoulder, soot still clinging to her curls. The faint rise and fall of the girl's chest was the only rhythm Alden trusted anymore. He knelt beside them, hat in hand. "You should have waited for me," he said quietly. Yanni looked up, eyes tired but steady. "If I had, she'd be gone." There was no bravado in her tone, no pride, only fact simple, undeniable. Alden exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You could have died." "I've done that before," she said softly, "just not all the way." He looked at her, then really looked, beneath the soot and sweat. She seemed carved from something more enduring than the earth around them. And for the first time, he understood that strength wasn't what she carried. It was what refused to leave her, no matter who did. He reached forward, hesitating just before his fingers brushed her cheek. "You're not alone here, Yanni." "Not anymore." She turned away, blinking hard. "They'll talk again. They always do." "Then let them," he said. "The truth doesn't need their mouths for a long time." They sat that way in silence, the wind threading through the broken boards, the faint scent of smoke turning into something cleaner. Later that afternoon, Kai Nantan came to the porch. His face was streaked with soot, his old eyes bright. He handed Alden a piece of charred wood, curved and dark as obsidian. "Fire takes. But it leaves memory," he said. "Keep this. It will remind you that life listens when we stand for what's right." Alden accepted it with a quiet nod. "She's the one who stood." Kai looked at Yanni and smiled faintly. "And you're the one who believed." When the old man left, Alden turned the burnt piece in his hand. It felt warm still, alive in some small way. He set it on the porch rail beside her. "Then it belongs to both of us." That evening, the townsfolk finished repairing the fence and rode off before dusk. The yard was littered with footprints, tools, and a strange new quiet, not emptiness, but peace. May came to check on Yanni's bandages, scolding gently. "You'll scar if you don't rest those hands." Yanni smiled faintly. "Scars don't frighten me." "Good," May said, tying the last knot. "'Cause men like Alden see truth better in the places that don't heal easy." Then she winked, patting Yanni's knee. "I'll make sure he remembers that." When night fell, Alden found Yanni, standing alone at the paddock, watching the moon rise over the Chiricahua peaks. The land smelled of smoke and earth, but also of something new, the faint sweetness of rain coming. He stepped beside her. For a while, they said nothing. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. "Do you miss your people?" he asked at last. She breathed slowly, eyes on the horizon, "Every day. But they wouldn't know me now. I've changed too much." "Maybe," he said, "but the part of you that sings to the wind that's still there, I heard it." She looked at him, startled by the honesty in his voice. "You listen to the wind only when it has something worth saying." The faintest smile touched her lips. "Then what did it tell you?" He met her gaze, his expression unguarded for the first time. "That you didn't just save my child. You brought her father back, too." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to say that. I already did." He reached for her hand, careful of the bandages, and she didn't pull away. The desert night seemed to draw closer around them, soft as breath. Somewhere behind the hills, thunder murmured not the crack of a storm, but the promise of rain that finally meant mercy. In the distance, the windmill groaned, turning once, twice. The air was heavy with the scent of wet dust. Yanni tilted her head toward the sky, eyes closing. "It's coming," she whispered. Alden looked at the woman the world had tried to break, and felt the truth of her words settle deep in his chest. "It's coming," he echoed. And this time, he wasn't talking about the rain. The storm arrived not with violence, but with grace. At first, it was only a hush, the stillness before the world remembers how to breathe. Then came the wind, gentle as a sigh through the mesquite branches, and the faint patter of drops on the porch roof. The smell hit first wet dust and life. Yanni stepped outside, barefoot, the boards cool beneath her feet. The sky cracked open in a low silver glow, and after 7 long months, rain finally touched the valley. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a small voice broke through the rhythm of falling water. "Mama, it's raining!" June burst through the door, hair flying, arms stretched wide. She twirled beneath the downpour, her laughter rising like birds startled into flight. Yanni stood frozen, unsure whether to run to her or to the shelter, until Alden appeared behind them, the lamplight outlining his tall frame in gold. He crossed the porch slowly, eyes on her. "You'll catch cold," he said softly. But there was no command in it, only care. Yanni smiled faintly. "The rain won't hurt me." He stepped down beside her, water already soaking through his shirt, and looked out across the valley. The flames that had once devoured his barn were nothing now but black soil, drinking deep of the gift it had begged for all season. The fields shimmered as if the desert itself had forgiven them. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was rain striking earth, filling the cracks, whispering to every dry root that it could begin again. Then Alden turned to her. "You once said the wind carries the voices of your people." Yanni nodded, her hair plastered against her cheeks. "When it rains, they speak clearer. They tell us what the fire could not take." He hesitated, searching her face. "And what do they say now?" She lifted her eyes toward the dark sky. "That I am home." The words broke something in him quietly, like an old gate opening. He took a slow breath, the rain tracing lines down his jaw. "Then let me stay there, too." She looked at him, startled, heart hammering in her throat. "Alden, I mean it." His voice trembled, but didn't falter. "You don't owe me anything, Yanni. Not for June, not for the fire. But if you'll have me, if you'll stay, we'll build it again. Everything, together." Her reply came in the smallest whisper. "I already stayed." The rain fell harder, softening the world around them. He reached for her hand, careful of the scars that wrapped her palms, and she let him. Between their fingers, the water pooled and ran, washing away the last trace of ash behind them. June danced through puddles, her laughter echoing across the yard like bells. May and Eli watched from the doorway, arms folded, smiling quietly. Even Kai stood beneath the eaves, eyes glinting like flint as he murmured something in Apache, a blessing, perhaps, or a thank you. Thunder rolled low and distant, not angry, but alive. Alden turned toward Yanni, brushing a raindrop from her cheek. "You've changed this place," he said. "The land, the people, me." She shook her head. "I didn't change it. I just waited long enough for it to remember what it was." He smiled tired, honest. "Then I'll wait with you." They stood together as the rain poured, until the desert smell turned sweet and green, until the last ember of smoke faded into the rhythm of water. When the storm began to ease, Yanni looked toward the horizon. The mountains glowed faintly, their red faces darkened by clouds. In that moment, she felt the land breathe again. She whispered, almost to herself, "The earth remembers mercy. Alden followed her gaze. And so do we, by dawn. Puddles mirrored the sunrise. The ranch shimmered broken fences, wet earth, a child's footprints through the mud. Everything ruined, everything alive. Yanni stood by the corral, the old windmill creaking behind her, in her open palms. She caught the last few drops, watching them slip through her fingers. They left small trails across her healing scars, glinting like silver threads, behind her. Alden and June approached. The little girl ran to her, holding a handful of wildflowers thin, bright things that had somehow survived the fire and the storm alike. For you, June said, beaming. Yanni crouched, accepting them with both hands. They grew fast. They were just waiting. Alden said, same as us. She smiled through tears she didn't hide. Together they turned toward the horizon, where the light spilled over the Chiricahuas, painting the soaked land gold. The valley would bloom again. The ranch would stand. And in that quiet, after the rain, it was no longer Coyote Bend the drought had known. It was Rainmaker's Hollow, named by a child, kept alive by the woman who taught them all that even the driest hearts could grow wildflowers.